In this episode, I sit down with Meg Nakamura, co-founder and CEO of Apto Payments, which is a card issuance for businesses. In 2015, they launched the first Bitcoin debit card in the US. And in this episode, we talk about how Meg's Japanese background influences the way she leads in Fintech, why she's a firm believer in seeing opportunities through, no matter how big or small, and her call on the industry to be more transparent, collaborative, and community-driven. I hope you enjoy this episode with Meg Nakamura. Meg, welcome to Humans of Fintech. I'm so excited to have you joining the show. Welcome. You're coming at us from San Francisco, right?
Thank you so much for having me, Nicole. It's great to see you again. Really nice to meet at Money 2020. I can't believe it's been, I guess, over a month even, but yeah, great to reconnect and see you again here.
Yeah, of course. Well, to kick things off, I love having these conversations to start with really your background and how that really influences the way that you have entered our fintech industry. So I know that your parents are from Tokyo, your family is Japanese, and you really kind of grew up and having this vision for doing good in the world. It's been instilled in you at an early age. So maybe we can kind of start there and how your background has just influenced that and how that's personified today.
Gosh, that's an easy start, I guess.
Simple.
Well, I love what you're doing with the podcast. I love your focus on highlighting maybe underrepresented groups, whether I want to call it that or not. But no, thanks for sharing. Yes, you're right. My parents are from Tokyo. Definitely had a very Japanese upbringing, despite growing up in a middle class, mostly white suburban neighborhood of suburb of Chicago. And to your point, it's interesting to think about how the Japanese culture or being raised in that environment has influenced me and the company that we're building today. One of the most simplest things to talk about is just access and my ability to really do whatever I wanted to growing up, and then seeking the opportunity and taking the rope or I guess being provided the rope and then taking the rope and seeing things through. And so just having that opportunity and that access has really been informative to me. Jumping ahead to Apto and what we're focused on, it is that bridge of fintech and building card programs is historically or traditionally more of a gated community or a tight ecosystem that's hard to break into. So if we can be on the forefront providing access to entrepreneurs and companies to launch card programs, that's really an easy bridge for me to talk about. Mm-hmm. As a funny thing, one of my colleagues always said, Meg, I guess it's because you're Japanese, but all of our meetings start on time. I don't know what that's about. And
oh my gosh, I love that.
So
we could all use more of that
too. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so got it. So not only was it instilled in you at an early age to provide access, which that is such a good point, because Japanese culture really is about leveraging technology to make life genuinely easier, in a way that is a little bit more effective almost than, say, what we get here in America, right? First of all, subways, I live in New York, they're not ever on time, or the bus system, thanks MTA, or rarely on time. But also just it feels like, in Silicon Valley, it's okay, if we can create an app that gets our food here faster, our laundry here faster, we're going to focus on that, as opposed to maybe other things that could maybe help bring equity to financial systems all the time. You know what I mean? The focus is a little off sometimes. And that, I think, is a cultural thing.
Yeah, I think, not to get too philosophical, I'm not at all a politician. I haven't studied politics or anything, but I do think it's interesting that society there works for the greater good and the large part of society, as opposed to any specific group. And probably the easy thing for me to point to. It is very homogeneous. So, that island nation thing makes that easier. But to the extent people feel connected and people feel like, you're doing something for the greater good, I think it's a nice orientation.
And so then, joining the fintech space almost feels like a natural evolution of that, right? Because I think for the most part, the people I interview or that I write about, right, they join fintech with that mission in mind, right? Like, great, I have this opportunity to combine, technology into finance to make it less shitty and to give that access, right? Was that mission exposed to you early on when you joined fintech, or was it kind of like, oh, I can join this industry, and later you realized you could do good with it?
Well, I love that you pieced it together. I wish that were genuinely the real story. It sounds so nice the way you put it, so elegant. I would confess, however, though, that my story is more about opportunity and more like seeing opportunities through. So my first job out of college, I met my co-founder. So since 2005, I've been working with my co-founder, which is pretty remarkable. And I got lucky in meeting Greg at a consulting company. He's a serial entrepreneur. How often do you meet serial entrepreneurs at consulting organizations? And literally, it was his support and his mentorship and his friendship that got me to this point. It's the opportunity of meeting Greg, the opportunity of meeting a serial entrepreneur, the opportunity of getting great exposure to Silicon Valley, to startups, to company building, to like even having the support to think that we could do this together or start a company. Like all of that comes together. Of course, just because you're given the opportunity doesn't mean that everyone sees it through. So I'll give myself credit for that. But I do feel very lucky that it was more a bunch of things coming together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and seeing opportunities through, right? I mean, it's not. It's I think that especially as women in male dominated spaces too, it can feel right. It can be intimidating to see those opportunities through, right? Even just generally speaking, right? Women tend to be they want to know all the answers before they see an opportunity through, right? They want to, see they want to see facts, they want to know things, whereas say our male counterparts will just do the jumping, which we can kind of do a little bit more jumping too. We just need to find the confidence to do it, and that's awesome that you had that instinctively, without, I mean, were you fearless through it all?
I guess in general, I'm okay taking risks. It's like, what have I got to lose type of thing.
Yeah.
And
Right.
maybe ignorance is bliss, right? Also, when you're young, like you don't know what you don't know type of thing. Again, like I wish I was so thoughtful in the way that you just presented. But yeah, no, I think it's a mix. You're right. I mean, those are the general realities. And yeah, it's interesting how they play out and manifest.
Mm-hmm. Well, take us back to, was it this moment that when you met your co-founder that made you realize that fintech would be this place where you would find this sense of belonging, or was there another micro story there?
Yeah, well, I would say with Greg, it's more like we could do whatever we put our minds to, and so it was the opportunity to build a company and build a company that could really generate change and impact. So the maybe silly joke I like to tell is consulting is great for consultants, right? Consulting, in consulting, I learned a lot. The client learned a little, but nothing really changed, right? Like that like reality, you go through enough projects or you go through enough work and you're just kind of like, all right, well, I learned a lot, but nothing's changing. So what can I do elsewhere or differently? And, not to make a dig, but I think financial institutions and regulators are always talking about financial access and financial inclusion and providing financial services to everyone. And that's just not the reality of how the world is. And so I think entrepreneurs and fintech really, we're actually all trying to move the needle there in a meaningful way. So it feels really good.
Yeah. I mean, what were some of the mental obstacles maybe that you did have to overcome during this process, right? I mean, you've been, if you met your co-founder in 2005, which you're right is remarkable, that you're still together, you're still in a happy relationship. That's good. But that's, well before the word fintech was being tossed around and coined. So yeah, what were some of maybe the mental obstacles that you did have to go through despite being someone open to taking a risk?
Well, in terms of how we actually started the company, we started at YC in summer of 2014. So we've been around for a while. And so it goes way far back to the extent that YC at the time didn't have like a financial fintech or financial services or fintech lead or partner or strategy. Now fast forward to today, and I think, the bulk of their go forward growth investments are absolutely fintech related. So when we were starting, blockchain and Bitcoin was kind of like the scary thing out there that some people had heard about, but most people were like, what is that crazy thing? And it was just an interesting time. I also would say card issuance or card programs, these words, they did not resonate. Marketo was not a household name. Investors were, not confident on anything payments infrastructure related. Stripe was like the early darling, but people didn't know what to make of it at scale. And so it wasn't, in this environment, all the wind is at fintech sails, but it was certainly not that back in 2014 even.
Oh man, was there ever a point where you're like, is it worth doing this? People don't see card issuance as sexy. I can't compete against Bitcoin. What am I going to do? Yeah. Did you ever have any of those moments of like, maybe I should not do fintech? Or was it just kind of always pretty positive-ish?
Yeah. It's, I guess to the point of your podcast and underrepresented groups, it's fintech is still like very male dominated, like you said, and very, your partners in this industry tend to be of the generations that we tend to talk about in terms of wanting to change, right? So it was a humbling experience, I guess. At least coming from consulting, it was one of those that you knew to expect some of that. But, I'm really pleased that at least things are moving in the right direction these days, and we're seeing some of that change. Did I ever think about leaving fintech or giving up on fintech? I mean, startups are a roller coaster, right? Like we'd be lying if we didn't admit at least that much. But I do think it's a place where you can create meaningful change and impact. So I think it's hard to find industries that, you could feel as strongly about.
It's true. It's what's continued to draw me into wanting to be a part of the space and exactly right, like build the platform that I have. I mean, I love that you've been so like persistent throughout the years, right? And kind of like I said, when did you maybe feel like, okay, Apto is like here and here to stay, right? Like that moment of, all right, this is going to work, right? Like we're not going to be overshined by this or that, or, in fintech, we tend to be like interested in the shiny new object. But yeah, how do you kind of push past that mentality and you're like, Apto is working?
I mean, we almost died so many times that there's so many of those stories.
We had 9 lives. And
exactly. I mean, at one point, this is when, I don't know if I've shared this story publicly, but back in 2016, we were working with Venmo powering their debit card. And then at one point, unsurprisingly, PayPal's like, we're going to take this over and replace you. Like, oh God, now what do I do? Right? Like I can't raise money on a program that's not going to be with us for forever. Right. And, you're a small team. Card issuance is still not sexy in 2016. Your biggest customer is going away. You're like, oh my God, what do we do? And at that time, the cool thing that we did have was a Coinbase debit card. And so at that point, I'm kind of like, well, if we're really truly excited about Bitcoin and we're partnering with Coinbase, why not like put our cash position in Bitcoin? And literally, that's what extended runway. If you think about that 2017 run up, we benefited from that. And so, sometimes better lucky than good, right?
Yeah.
Literally almost died then. So that's just like one of the many stories. But in terms of feeling like we've made it, I will say that you probably hear this all the time, but the hardest thing really is recruiting the team and having great colleagues. And so over the course of 8 years, I've worked with many different people and had many different leaders of the company. But this set that we have right now is truly outstanding. And the fact that we've been able to scale the company and scale the team size and still maintain that like close knit community, plus, like maintain that inherent trust in the company and the company culture has been a real win for me. And it's something I'm really proud of.
Yeah, that is something to be proud of. I mean, I write about it often, right? Like, how do you actually create that like team and culture, and especially a diverse one, right? That is capable of sustainability, right? To be with you for the long run. That is a hard thing to accomplish. What is it about your team now, though, that makes you feel extra like, all right, this is like extra proud? Like you were so proud in that response.
A colleague of mine said this before we got to work together, but he was saying, Meg, you want to be a 50-person company, but operate like you're 500, right? And so in Fintech land, or in an industry where you're moving people's money and you have to reconcile down to the penny, it really is professional services, and it really is something that you can't muck up, right? Mm-hmm. And so you don't get a hall pass for something going wrong when it involves money. No. And so that level of maturity and professionalism, it really, you have to earn it. And I think those are some of the feelings that you get when you know things are clicking and working. You've done the right things. You've invested in the right areas. Might not be the sexy, flashy stuff all the time, but the reliability and trust and knowing that your customers can rely on you is really helps you sleep at night.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and to circle back to the original kind of reason, and even if you didn't realize it at the time when you were entering fintech, I bet in unconsciously you were realizing, like, deep in your values, right? Like, oh, this industry is working for me, or it's helping to fuel that inner flame of mine that wants to do good, right? And to help with that access and use technology to deliver that access to the finance industry. What would be like your piece of advice, though, for some of the other founders and CEOs that are listening to this, that are also looking to build these teams that they can be proud of too? Like, what do you maybe look for, or that type of thing?
The advice, I think, has to change and evolve with the reality of what work is like post-pandemic, or I don't know, are we allowed to say post-pandemic?
I know, right? I never know.
It's challenging. It's hard to meet people. It's hard to know how people really are over Zoom. It's just, you get snippets, and it's hard to get enough data points. I think historically, if you're reading about how best to recruit, people might say, like, go for a walk with a person, don't meet them in a conference room, or take them on some random activities to see how they deal with it. Or, you really want to get to know people before you hire them, but it is really challenging, especially if you're growing really fast. So I think the cop-out answer really is to have a great head of people or people person, or someone that you can lean on for that. I am super, super lucky that my right-hand person for, many, many years, 5+ years at the company, he's just a jack of all trades. And on the side, as a side hustle, he's an Olympic weightlifting coach. But this guy, right, like, he's a coach, and he cares about people, and he cares about building a community, and he cares about building the team, and making sure that, all those intangibles come together. And so I cannot put a value on what Ben provides, but having someone on the people side is super, super valuable.
Yeah. Shout out to Ben. And well, I love how you talked about, like, almost like a community, right? In your own company, in your own team. It's like we're serving communities, and also we need to have that internally, right? Because that also fuels, right, the future perceptions of future leaders, right? People that would want to be in your shoes one day, right? And kind of paving that pathway. And I'm a believer in us here on Earth should be providing or paving the way, right, for the next generation to want to be a part of the fintech industry. And to your point of or to our points, right, of it being still largely dominated by one demographic. If we want to see that change, then we have to have people like Ben recruiting the right people and bringing that community internally. So we're not just serving communities externally, but we're also serving ours internally. And I think that's super important, but probably easy to lose track of, given the startup world and the chaoticness that is the fintech industry. So I can imagine that balance is challenging at times.
Yeah, I can. I guess going back to some of the Japanese influences, for better or for worse, I would say that historically Japanese companies have had sort of a lifetime employment philosophy, where you join a big company and you kind of rotate different roles every few years. And so the point of that is not that I want to provide lifetime employment, but philosophically, I want people to be with us for a very long time. And maybe like Google is the modern example of kind of being able to move roles. But I think growth is really important. And so we spend a lot of time and emphasis on learning and education, or continuing learning and education. And so, if people can grow with us, right, we'd love to keep them. We don't want people to build a base here and then grow somewhere else, right? We want to retain those folks. So that's one. And I think, again, like the people who are in HR, we've done a great job there. I was going to say something else, and now I'm blanking.
All good. I am actually thinking about kind of this overall evolution of from you starting out, from the evolution even of this like conversation, between your past and like your current position in the fintech industry, and having overcome all of the initial difficulties, or having 9 lives in the fintech space, if you will. But you have accomplished so much. You've gone through the roller coaster that is fintech startup CEO founder land. How do you feel maybe about your current position in the fintech industry, having overcome these initial difficulties and positives in your career? How are you feeling now?
Yeah, I think the generic thing to point to is it's a chaotic market. It is just unprecedented, and it feels like any day you're going to wake up and there's another shoe to drop type of thing. I mean, there's so many examples of, oh my God, can you believe that happened? Or, oh my God, really? That's the situation. So it's crazy what's happening. And so, where I'm going with this is, in this market where maybe investors are spooked, or it's a tough market to operate in. I'm excited that the best companies will survive and will get through this period. I think the ones that maybe had less sound economics or commercials or revenue models, these will all start to work themselves out. And having survived multiple deaths or seeming deaths, you have to go through these moments, and this one's going to be a tough one. But I do think it's an exciting period. And alongside small companies needing to survive, I do think big companies need to survive. And coming out of this, I don't know if it's a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, but the companies that do survive, FinTech's going to be so exciting, because the new companies now are going to be that much more mature and that much more scaled. And, we'll be offering better technology across the board, which is a win for everyone, not just in FinTech.
Right, exactly. I mean, we still are such a small percentage of financial services in reality, right? So there's still so much room to grow. This is not the end of FinTech, folks, just because things are a little doom and gloom, basically, is what I'm getting from you, Meg.
That's right.
Yeah. So anyways, I know I like to present a positive future. So as we are closing out the show, I want to ask you my favorite question I ask all my guests, and that is, if we need to be the change that we want to see, what change do you wish to see in FinTech, and how do you embody it?
Oof.
I know it's a big question.
How much time do we have left? That is a great question. I will say, so one observation is that I feel there are many companies at or around our stage that have great potential to create that change that I talked about, or disruption or evolution a couple years from now. I wonder, how you get from where we are today to even bigger scale. And I would hope, maybe if I had that genie bottle, right? one of my wishes would be for better transparency, I think, and better collaboration. I think companies can work better together. I think data can be better shared. I think, working together is a win-win as opposed to a zero-sum game. Specifically in our industry, I would say maybe fraud, right? Or, fraudulent identities or attacks. If we can more openly share, then we can all be better protected and work on better solutions together. I think, in the fraud example, depending on who you're talking to, somebody says oh, well, they said their fraud rates are at X, and these guys said fraud rates are at 100th of X. And it's just apples and oranges. And until we can have an honest conversation, we can't really tackle those problems and work together on it. I think identity fraud and hacks are happening all the time. And it's just if we can work together on it, we're all better protected, as opposed to trying to be better than everyone else and operating in our own silos. So I would say transparency would be amazing. And one of the ways in which we embody transparency at Apto, at least, is transparency amongst the company, information sharing. Of course, there's a very small amount of information that you can't share widely, but we really do try and be as transparent as possible, because we really inherently trust our folks, and we want people to be making the best decisions at all times based on all the information that we have. So,
well said. Well said. I think you're so right, and I think it might be something, the collaboration and community over competition is something that we are going to probably see more of as we eventually come out of the chaotic market that we're in, right? Like that might be one of the results, right? Is hopefully, I would hope so, is because you're so right. At the end of the day, if we can operate more of as a fintech almost community and not see each other, like we're too small guys to still be seeing each other as like such competition. Like the competition is the more traditional or outdated financial system that we need to restructure, right? When we're building something new. So we gotta do it together, or else how are we gonna how are we actually gonna make a dent in this thing? How are we gonna go from being, 1% of financial services to 99%, like the traditional firms? So I'm with
Not
you.
all of us are gonna be JP Morgan Chase years from now, right? Like we're not gonna be able to do everything under the sun.
We're gonna have to come together to make it happen. So gosh, no, such a good point. Oh my gosh. Well, final question for you, Meg. What is one piece of advice you would give to listeners here who maybe still feel like outsiders or like they haven't found their belonging yet in fintech?
Wow. Who haven't found their belonging. I'll confess, entrepreneurship or being a founder, it can be lonely at the top. I think surrounding yourself with the right friends who can be your sounding board and your confidant certainly is critical to making it through. Chances are, I don't want to say 100%, but like 99% of the time, whatever you're facing or whatever challenge you're going through, someone has gone through it before, and you just need to know that person to be able to talk about it and work it through. And I think asking for help along those lines is the other side of the coin. But just being, again, open to needing help or wanting help or seeking advice. People are out there and people want to help. And so I think being open to that and seeing things as a positive, despite how, difficult or challenging something might seem, is always going to help you in the end.
A perfect way to end this conversation, Meg, all the way from talking about your roots in Japanese culture to building community within and outside of the industry, and circling to transparency and helping others build a community even in fintech so that they feel like they belong to. Thank you so much, Meg, for this awesome conversation. Thank you for being open and honest and all of the gems that you've shared.
Thank you, Nicole. It's great to see you again. Had a lot of fun doing this.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. To hear our next story from another diverse leader, be sure to tune in next week. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to our show and give it a 5-star rating, as it helps our message reach more people who want to find belonging too. Thanks for tuning in.